Welcome to It Depends. Aaron would say, buy the house. I would say, maybe not so fast, because the right move is not always obvious. We are taking on mortgage and real estate headlines, hot takes, and advice that sounds good online, then breaking it down to what actually matters. Drop your opinion, challenge ours, and send us a headline to debate. Because the real answer is usually, well, it depends. So, Aaron, question.
Yes.
So you think that now is the best time to buy in the past 7 years? Why do you think that?
Well, I think the opportunity is there, Michelle. I think you have an opportunity because you have a lot of inventory out there. You have a lot of sellers willing to make a deal. Let's pause for a second and let's go back to the pandemic. Okay, if you were a first-time home buyer or you were putting down 5% or 10%, and you weren't willing to overpay for a house, you were boxed out. You were not getting a home. Well, that doesn't exist today, right? And a lot of that behavior, a lot of that situation stayed all the way through 2021, 2022. 2022, it started to loosen up a little bit, but mortgage rates shot up, right? And so it was a difficult time to buy then. And then you didn't have inventory. You had a lot of sellers who have 3% rates, 4% rates. They just weren't going to budge.
Right.
Well, today, because we're 7 years out, you have a lot more home sellers who are willing to get rid of their home at their low rate. Life has changed. They're ready to move on. So inventory is higher. And they're willing to make deals. Now, the market hasn't come down in most markets, but sellers are willing to come down. We hear stories, you see contracts, I see contracts of people that have offered 10%, 15% lower than list price, and they've gotten the offer accepted. So in my opinion, today you have an opportunity to make look, I don't think it's the most optimal time to buy a house, but when is, right? No, Michelle, I always like to tell the story about November 2022, or sorry, November 20, I think it was November 2020. Okay. 54% or something like that of Americans thought it was a bad time to buy a house. It was the greatest time in history to buy a house. Actually, it was September 2020. Home prices have skyrocketed 40% since then. Interest rates were 3%. It was the greatest time in history. Half of Americans thought it was a bad time to buy. That's not a knock on half of Americans. That just tells you none of us have a crystal ball. None of us can have
No.
a crystal ball.
Sometimes it's just luck that you bought a house at that time. Most people, it wasn't a strategy. They just, they found something they wanted. They bought a house, but I think, too, Aaron, and I was talking to, a friend of mine in Pennsylvania. Their market is so hot, they're still in multiple offers. However, in Sherman, Texas, we're on a list of one of the hottest buyers market. So I think part of that too, it's regional. It's localized. Not all markets are the same, but to your point, I see sellers willing to take prices that they weren't willing to take even 6 months ago because the market has adjusted. They need to make a move. They're just doing whatever they have to do to make that move.
For sure. And Michelle, look, I have one rule of thumb. Okay, when you're looking to buy a house, number one, you have to afford it. You got to be comfortable. Number two, you got to be emotionally ready. Owning a home is an emotional experience. If your marriage isn't solid, you're going to go through some stuff when you buy a home, right? And so there's going to be a lot of expenses. You got to be emotionally prepared. Not everybody's emotionally prepared for that, but you got to be able to afford it. So I just think that in today's environment where you have home sellers willing to deal, you have home builders that now have the most inventory they've had in years, right? Because they built a bunch of homes into this demand and now they're kind of stuck with them. So they're willing to make deals. They're offering 3% rates. They're offering $40,000 off. They're offering kitchens. They're offering the world, right? I don't know that you're going to get much more opportunity than this to get a good deal. And so, if you're sitting there waiting, okay, for rates to come down, prices to come down, well, Michelle, you can tell them, and I can tell them, I probably have 1,000 buyers in my database that are all waiting for the same thing. And that's in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I'm at. In Sherman, Texas, you probably have 500 of them, right? So when rates come down, if they ever come down, or if prices come down, if they ever come down, you're all coming off the sidelines at the
You're
same
back
time.
into supply and demand, and I'd love to argue with this because I really like arguing with you, but I can't argue with you on this one.
Hey, it's
Like,
tough to it's tough to argue today's market. I mean, it's because of where we came from, Michelle, right? I mean, what we saw in 2020 and 2021 and part of 2022, it was tough on first-time buyers. And when you had first-time home buyers literally crying that I want to buy a house, I can afford to buy a house, and I can't get an offer accepted
no,
because the
no,
seller is only looking at all cash offers, and there's hedge funds buying, and there's investors buying, and I can't catch a break. Well, today's your break. It may not be optimal. It's not the way it was then, but you know, home prices are staying flat. Incomes are rising. Affordability was awful a year or two ago, but affordability is not as bad anymore because incomes have come up, home values have stayed flat. And so as you have that, affordability becomes better. Now, it's still not incredibly affordable, don't get me wrong, but I think in most markets, right? Here's one of the things too, Michelle, I think that especially first-time home buyers or even step-up buyers have to come to grips with is that, look, your market has grown out of control. Your market appreciated by 40 to 50%. But it doesn't mean there's homes you can't afford. Now, no, you're not going to love that house. You know, you may have to do some work to make it your own.
for sure.
But get on the ladder. You know,
Yeah,
you're never going to get that half if you can only afford 300,000 today, you're never getting to that $600,000 house until you get on the ladder. Because I promise you, unless you're just in some amazing job or you're self-employed with amazing upside, you're probably not getting there income-wise for a while, right? But
right. Yeah,
your home may
get what you
appreciate.
get. Don't throw a fit. That's what I just
Yeah,
get
your
what you
home. Look at
but
all these
take
people.
advantage of the market that we're in. But though, Aaron, I think the there are still um though it is a buyer's market and it is easier to buy right now. It's not just easier to buy because the home prices are um they've settled down. It's easier to buy because there's more loan programs available right now than there has been in, gosh, 20 something years. But whether or not it makes sense for you as a home buyer to buy really just depends. That depends on so many other factors. And there's a lot of people right now that I talk to that it doesn't matter what the price of the house is. If I were to put on my mother advisor hat, I would say, this is still not for you. You need to continue to rent. So I think it's just one of those, it depends. It is a buyer's market right now, and it is the best we've seen it in 7 years. Is this the right market for you? I don't know. It depends. We need to have a conversation because if you aren't prepared to make the payment consistently, every single month on time without any glitches, and you don't have an emergency fund in your account after you come up with the money that it takes to get into the house, you really don't need to be a homeowner right now.
Well, I mean, I agree and I disagree, Michelle, because
Go ahead.
here's where I would differ from you. You are a mom and you're an amazing advisor, and I don't want to knock anything you're doing because I would take advice from you too. But what I would tell that person is that affordability to me means that you can afford the monthly payment. Now, should you have some cash reserves? Absolutely. But if you also have access to cash reserves, I think you're okay. If mom and dad,
What if that access is mom and dad?
if mom and dad will bail you out, cousin, Sam will bail you out, and you know that that person will bail you out if you lost your job for 6 or 7 months, then I think you're okay too. And here's why I think you're okay. The chance of you failing, I did a Facebook post about this. The chance of your home catching on fire or the chance or you drowning tomorrow is exponentially greater than you losing your house historically. The amount of homes that go into foreclosure that get lost, that get taken from people
Okay.
historically over the last 70 years, okay? And that includes that period of time where foreclosures were
Where we
rampant.
were foreclosing pretty easily.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where people were going to foreclosure left and right in 08, 09, right? So, but you don't even have to take that period out. Yeah, that was an
Okay.
anomaly. That was an anomaly created because by us
Okay.
lenders. We
Mm-hmm.
overlent, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But that has gone away. The average, it's like a 0.5% a year of people go into foreclosure. So, the chances of you going into foreclosure are slim and none. And so, you know, so affordability, in my opinion, you look at VA loans, for example. Veterans are putting zero down and have historically. Many of them don't have savings. They really don't default. right now. There's a different honor code in the military, don't get me wrong. But it shows you that you don't necessarily need a down payment. You don't necessarily need a lot of reserves. You need a desire. And
So
you
if
need
you're okay with cold showers because
yes.
you don't have anybody to bail you out when your water heater goes out,
Yes. But you own
own the
your
home.
home.
Buy
You own your home,
Aaron says,
Michelle.
buy that house.
Buy the house for Christ's sake. I mean, that is true. Look, you may have to eat some ramen some nights. You may have to give up Starbucks every single day, you know? But at the end of the
But
day,
buy that house.
hey, I will tell you this, Michelle, and you tell me your story, but I remember buying my first house. Okay. I was like 26 years old. I had a new wife. We were planning on having children. And I bought a $130,000 house. The interest rate was like 14.5% interest. I was making like $7 an hour in my job. I think my wife was making like $9 an hour in her job. I mean, I don't even know how we afforded that house. It was
Oh, no
it was
kidding.
it was everything we had. But you know
Yeah.
what? At first it was very scary. And the first year it felt rough. But afterwards, we both got some raises and the payment just felt normal and we changed our life, right? We didn't go to the
Right.
movies every Friday night anymore. We didn't go out to eat as often. We just kind of changed our life and it worked. And then ultimately we bought another house and then we sold that and bought another house. And so ultimately it's just worth it to do it. And I think that it's scary. Don't get me wrong. But I think that what you said, Michelle, is right. It has to be affordable. You
It
have to
has
know
to
who's
be
gonna bail you
affordable.
out if you
Yeah.
can't make some payments,
Yeah.
right? But like I said, you gotta be emotionally prepared. I think the emotional part is because if it gets a little wonky, right? If it starts to be where, it's too much and you've ditched out of Starbucks 8 days in a row and now you got a
Now you're
caffeine.
fiending for that caffeine.
Yeah, and Folgers at home's just not cutting it, right? And then all of a sudden you start blaming, your spouse or your kids, and you can't do that. You gotta be emotionally
Tell
prepared
you,
for
there's not anything more expensive than a divorce. So if the buying a house means that you're going to get a divorce, don't buy the
don't
house.
yeah, don't do it. Hey, you know what? That's a great segue to don't buy homes with your girlfriends and boyfriends. Okay.
Oh,
I mean, how many times a year do we see that, Michelle? And look,
oh my
yeah,
gosh.
you know
And
what?
they
I
want so
I know you
badly
love
to
each
take
other.
each other off the loan and they can't. And it doesn't work that way.
The only way it works, and nobody ever does it, is you have to sit down with an attorney and you have to lay it all out. If we break up, here's exactly what happens. And I know it sucks to think about it, but it's no different than making a will. It sucks to
Yeah.
think about, but you need one, right?
It's
And you're gonna
preparing for the what ifs that could happen in the future if things fell apart.
And you gotta lay all that out. You gotta say, what happens if we break up? What happens if one of us dies? What happens if one of us becomes disabled? You gotta lay it all out because
Yeah.
as Michelle will talk about, we're both kind of laughing about it, but every year I end up with one or two people who come back to me and say, I should have listened to you and I bought this with my boyfriend and my
One or
boyfriend
two a year. I
at least
hear that a month. It's
we're
crazy.
a little more reasonable in Las Vegas than in Sherman. But it is yeah, that's a big no for
It
me.
is. It is. Me too. But what's different about well, when you're licensed and the advice that you give as a loan officer because they qualify. It works on paper. It fits the guidelines. Yes, I can do this loan. Should you do this loan? It really depends on so much more than just what I'm seeing on an application.
Yeah.
And
I agree with that, but I think that we have to be careful because I think that
you're right.
it's very easy, you know, paralysis by analysis is a real thing, and there's always a reason not to do something. There was a reason today for me to cancel this podcast. Okay, there's always a reason to not do something, and it's a good reason, but you
Mm.
have to battle through. And owning a home is one of those things. It's not like going to the gym and making the
Okay,
decision
so
in the
you're
morning.
freaking telling me to remove the emotions and make a business decision based on my future. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
I don't think it's just a business decision, but it is in part. I think it's look. Here's my thing about buying a house. You need shelter. It's a need. You have to have a
You
roof
do
over your
have
head.
to have a place to live.
You have to have a place to live. So it's either going to be you live with your family, you rent, or you own. Well, living with family, you did that when you were a kid. It's not fun to do as an adult. Okay, I promise you, if you live
Oh,
under your
I've
mom and dad's roof, you're
been
paying my
there,
mom
done
and dad.
that. as an adult, move back in with mom and dad. I was a young adult, but still not a good idea.
Right, because if you move back in with mom and dad, it's mom and dad's rules, even if you're 40 years old. You're playing under mom and dad's rules. You really want to be under mom and dad's rules in your 40s? So take that out of the equation. So now the
Yeah.
choice is, do I rent or do I own?
Yeah.
Well, if you rent, you're still paying a mortgage. You're paying your landlords. So, so to me, it's a no-brainer. Now, Aaron, it's way cheaper to rent than it is to own. Well, it doesn't have to be. You just want more house than you should probably
Yeah.
afford, right?
It's interesting.
Make it close.
This was an interesting conversation I had with the customer last week. They looked at how much they would be paying for this house over a 30-year period of time. Ever happened to you? Absolutely. But they'd never bought a house. They have always rented. I was like, well, what have you paid for the past 10 years? And if you continued paying that, what would that total up to be? And you have nothing.
Nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
And look, nobody knew what was going to happen in 2020 and 2021. But homeowners got 40% appreciation, right?
Well, that was jackpot.
If you were renting, you missed.
Yeah.
And the average homeowner today, I think I saw some stat that they have 300,000 of equity. The average renter is worth like 10 grand. I mean, the average homeowner is worth 30 times what the average renters. They didn't do anything super smart. All they did was make the decision to buy. They let that little voice in their head that was saying, don't, because they had it too. Because Michelle, I don't know how many houses you bought in your life. I've bought a bunch in my life, and I can assure you,
20 something. It's stupid.
Yeah.
I moved a lot.
Every single house I bought in my life, at some point I said, don't do this. And my wife has said, don't do this. You're ignoring God's signals. God is telling you not to do this, right? And you just have to push through and say, I've done this before. I know what the results are. I'm a lender. I've dealt with thousands of people
trusting
in
the
my life.
process. Yep, this is wealth building process.
I mean, I've seen how successful people are.
Yeah.
I love telling the story, Michelle, about this was in 2008 during the mortgage crisis. Las Vegas, as everybody knows, was ground zero. Las Vegas, man, everybody was going to foreclosure or short sale. And I was working at Bank of America at the time. And this investor came into my office and he wanted to buy a home. It was like $150,000 home. And I'm like, how many homes do you own? He owned 10 homes at a time. And so, back then it was very difficult to get a loan done because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had very strict
Because we
guidelines
capped. Yeah.
about how many you could own. So we couldn't get him a loan. And I was thinking to myself, and I was like, when did you buy these, 9 houses? And he said, oh, in the last 4 months. And I was thinking to myself, this is the dumbest dude on the planet. Like, what is this guy thinking?
Yeah, now he owns a casino in Vegas.
Well, yeah, pretty much. The dude owns like 40 houses today. I still say on him. He owns like 40 houses today. Those homes are worth like $25 million, and he hasn't sold any of them. He kept buying, and he always buys. And he wasn't smarter than everybody. He just was more courageous. And I remember him back then telling me the Warren Buffett saying, buy when everybody else is fearful, right?
Yeah.
Be afraid when everybody else is buying.
Let me tell you, there's 3 investors that I've talked to this week. So this is Thursday. 3 investors. One of them I talked to yesterday. He's buying a house for $50,000. He's putting $50,000 into it, and he's just going to hold it and lease it out. Why in the hell would you pass on that deal? But if you're not paying attention to what's going on in the market, you're going to miss those deals. Now, is he second guessing? No. I mean, it's a lot of work. We'll just do a HELOC on the loan that he has. I mean, on his primary residence, he'll pay cash on this house. He'll buy and hold. He's buying when no one else is.
Yeah. Well, and you look at Berkshire Hathaway. So Warren Buffett's retired, but he's still, he's still associated with the board. They just bought the other day, Michelle, I don't know if you saw it, they bought the 3rd home builder. They've literally bought 3 home builders in the last 6 months.
When the home builders are going broke right now, they got too many houses on the ground. They've got to build on lots, even though they don't want to build on them because it's better than bailing on the lots.
Yeah.
He's buying them.
He's buying. What does that tell you? Because he knows that we're going to wake up someday, probably pretty soon, the next 2 to 5 years, and we're going to see 2021 all over again. And it's just a buy and hold. And literally, isn't buying a house that anyway? Because you need shelter, right? Michelle, how long have you lived in your house?
Well, and the IRS if you're buying a house for primary residence anyway, you're going to buy and hold for at least 2 years.
Right, for the taxes. And so, Michelle, how long have you lived in your house?
Oh, I've been in that's an unfair question because I move and buy a lot.
Okay, so
I'm not
you
your
move
average
about,
buyer, but the
but you stay probably at least a few years every time,
I
right?
do. Yeah,
Yeah, I
lately.
mean, yeah, this is it's like what happens if I buy today and my home goes down in value in the next year? Okay,
You're not moving next year anyway, so what does
you're
it
not
matter?
right. What happens if I buy
Pay less
Yahoo
in
stock?
taxes.
What happens if I
Yeah,
buy Yahoo stock today and it goes down in a year? I gotta
right.
hold it.
Yep.
It only is a loss if I sell as a loss. If I have the wherewithal to just stay, then I don't even then why even watch it? Quit going to
Yeah,
Zillow and looking at the value, right? I mean,
yeah.
so but in most markets, like you said,
So
Michelle, there's markets in Pennsylvania, there's markets, in
there are
Missouri.
still hot markets around
Um,
here where
uh,
there's multiple offers and you're having to fight to get in the house. So
right. Even in a
it's
ba like, even the national market's up like 2, 3% a year
mhm,
over the last few
mhm,
years, and that's super
mhm.
low. So,
Yeah.
you buy a $300,000 house and it only goes up 2%, it's still 6,000. But if it went
You
down
still
it
don't have
went
a
down
place to
three
live.
if it went down 3%, it's 9,000, you know, if you don't sell, you wait it out. And so
Yeah.
Warren Buffett's investing hundreds of millions of dollars, his company, that he's retired from, in home builders because of what you said, Michelle, right? They're stressed out. They're having difficulty with their margins. They're having to make unique business decisions.
Mhm,
That's capture opportunity. That's your opportunity. You have home sellers that have listed their home too high. They need to
mhm.
move on. They want to go be with their grandchildren, or they want to downsize. They want to take some of that 40% off the pass line. They're willing to give you 5 or 10% off,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Go find one of them. Be patient.
Oh,
Find the right
you
home.
know what? So let's just wrap this one up. Now is the best time to buy in the past 7 years for all of the reasons that we talked about. Is it the best time for you? It really just depends. But to Aaron's point, stop overthinking it.
And stop watching, you know, what frustrates me so much, and you're amazing on social media, Michelle, and I have a big, presence on social media.
You got a much
But
bigger presence
what
on
drives me
social media.
nuts are these people that are so negative on the market. If you go back and look at their timeline, they've been saying the same stuff for 5 years, okay? And chances are they live with their parents at 40 years old, right? Why would you trust somebody who you don't know where they live? You don't know if they own a home. Why are you taking advice from people on the internet, including me or Michelle, right? Take advice from us as lenders who have been doing this for decades and who have seen the success rate and have had personal success. Don't just take our advice because you see us on Facebook or Instagram. And I would say the same thing about all these TikTokers and YouTubers and stuff. Look, creators get paid by clicks. Telling you to buy a house doesn't get a lot of clicks. Telling you to not buy a house and why gets a ton of clicks, right? There's no motivation in them for them to tell you when it's time to buy a house. We're telling you our honest opinion, and I think we agree, Michelle. We have a little difference of opinion, but our opinion is that if you can afford it and you're emotionally prepared, you should be out looking. Take your time, be patient, find the right deal, find the right house, but don't let some TikToker talk you out of it.
Mm, love it. Thanks for listening to this episode of It Depends. Be sure to follow, like, and share us with others.